Okay, well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick Milliken from the Poison Pen Bookstore, and we're here with another of our virtual events. And I'm really excited to have not just one, but two of my very favorite authors and friends with me here today. We're here to talk about Deon Meyer's brand new book, The Dark Flood. And our good friend Michael Connelly has kindly agreed to join us for the conversation today. And Mike's going to be doing the heavy lifting with the interview. But if you have questions for Deon or Mike, go ahead and put them in the comments field, and I'll be happy to ask any questions you might have. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you very much, Patrick. It's such a pleasure to be here.
It's great to see you both. And it's funny, I remember, oh gosh, it's been a few years now, but you were both here. I first met you, Deon, when Mike, a number of years ago, Mike had a habit of taking authors out on the road with him, and it was great. I remember one year you took George Pelecanos, if I'm not mistaken, and then one year went on the road with Deon, and we had a program for, I think it was, Dead at Daybreak, maybe? I can't remember.
Probably, I think you're right.
It's been a good long time. But yeah, and Mike has a brand new show that we were just talking about at the Lincoln Lawyer, which is wonderful on Netflix. And so gentlemen, I will, as I say, I'll stay in the background here, but have fun.
Sure, I'm glad to be here and to see Deon again. It's been a while. I didn't really take people on the road. I went out on the road because it's just more fun to be at places, have places to eat afterwards, that kind of thing. But it's always fun to be with somebody who has, done the same thing. I do remember that the Meyer Connelly tour was unique in that people kept mixing us up. And, they would come up to me to sign Deon Meyer books and vice versa. So I always said, he's the one who smokes. I don't know if it's smoke anymore, but if there's somebody standing behind a bookstore smoking, that's not me.
Mike, do you remember what happened at Poison Pen?
No, what happened?
It's one of my favorite stories. We both had the same goatee and the same glasses, and we sort of looked like each other, as you said. And at Poison Pen in Scottsdale, you had these big tables of books that you had to sign, and I finished my smaller table much quicker, and I went outside for a smoke. And this gentleman came walking up to the bookstore because we had this event some 15 minutes later. And when he saw me, he had all your books in his hands. And when he saw me, he thought I was you. So he came up to me and he said, Mr. Connelly, would you mind signing my books? And I said, well, I'm so sorry, but I'm not Michael Connelly. And he got quite upset. And he thought, you were not willing to sign his books. And I remember when we finally walked into the hall there where all the people were sitting, I caught his eye and he sort of did a double take, and then the light went on for him.
I remember that well.
Well, at least I didn't lose that reader because of that.
Right.
So let's talk about The Dark Flood. When I read your novels, I'm always hit by the idea that we're doing the same thing on opposite sides of the globe, I guess you'd say. But I'm also always hit with the understanding of how global storytelling can be. Around the world, there are always going to be different languages and cultures and customs, even police procedures. But at the end of the day, human nature is the same no matter where you are. And things like greed and desire are global motivations, and huge bureaucracies of any kind are susceptible to corruption and inevitable decay. My last book was called The Dark Hours. Yours is called The Dark Flood. And I got to tell you, we could have just switched titles and I think it all would have worked out pretty well.
Right.
Because I think we're digging for gold in the same mines. Wouldn't you agree?
Absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. And I think what is really great about that is that although my books are translated, I think story and the humanity of characters is universal. It works. If it works in one culture, in one country, I think it works everywhere. And that, I think, is the great saving grace of it.
Yeah, but so speaking of titles, how did you land on The Dark Flood?
With great trepidation. It's always difficult. I have in English. I have a UK publisher like you do. I have a US publisher and sometimes also a Canadian publisher, and they all need to agree on the title that works for them, because obviously you can't have different titles for the same book, especially on the internet these days. A lot of folk will think that they haven't read the book because it's got a different title. In Afrikaans, it was called Donker Drif, and donker means dark, and drif is like a fjord, a river crossing, but it is also a passion. So it had this double meaning. It's the name of the farm in the book. And we really, I racked my mind trying to come up with an English name for the farm that would have the same connotation, this dark passion that is greed in the book, and we just couldn't find anything. And I think my British publisher finally, we went through a lot of options, and it's either him or my agent Isabel Dixon who finally suggested The Dark Flood, and I said, let's go with this. And then I actually went back to the translation and I changed a paragraph just to make it relevant for the character Sandra Steenberg, the term The Dark Flood.
Yeah, it's a real pain when you have publishers all over the world, isn't it?
Absolutely.
So, the book kind of starts out with police politics, one of my favorite subjects to write about. And Benny and Vaughan, well, let me just stop here. Can you say, how do you say their last names? I want to make sure I have it right.
You're gonna battle with Griesel and Cupido. Cupido is easy, but Griesel, I know everybody outside of South Africa has problems with it, but you can say it any way you want.
Okay, I'm going to go with Benny and Vaughan.
There we go.
So it starts out with them being, demoted for just doing their jobs as police officers, and they're sent out, sent away basically out to Stellenbosch. And so it's a bit of a fish out of water story and a zero to hero story because, but most of all, when it comes to these characters, it's a redemption story. They make the best of their situation and parlay what seems to be small case, maybe a dead end assignment into something much bigger. And so to me, that's a little bit of a refreshing move you made. Was that something that you felt like I got to shake up what I'm doing here with these guys?
Yes, I did. You know how hard it is to stay fresh, especially if you have a series with the same character, to challenge yourself as an author, but also to do something different with the character so that you don't have the same situation in their personal and their professional lives every time. I was in the lucky position as an author, in the unlucky position as a South African. There's been lots of shake-ups in the South African police service. The politics have been really bad. Some of my good friends who are in the police service have been pretty unhappy, and some of them have lost their jobs. So, there was a lot to work with there. But yes, it was absolutely to put them into a new environment and see how they react.
So, they're sent out to this area called Stellenbosch, and I have to say I really appreciate the constant reminder to your readers of the name Bosch. I sincerely appreciate it. I've been, and this, I kind of was preparing what my questions would be before we got on, and I just found out that you actually live in Stellenbosch, because when I visited you before in South Africa, you weren't living there at the time. So now some of this makes sense. But I've been to Stellenbosch, and it's kind of like South Africa's Napa Valley. To my thinking, very bucolic, very beautiful. I went there to taste wine. The cover of your book, I think, even shows a vineyard, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right.
So, you have in big letters, The Dark Flood, but it doesn't look too dark here. It looks really nice. And so, but it's your job. You went there to find the darkness, right?
Right, which is hard to find in a town like this. As you say, it is exceptionally beautiful. The mountains, the vineyards. It's a student town, thousands of young people. There's a vibrance and a dynamic to the town that is incredible. It is also the technological hub of South Africa, the place where a lot of startups begin in South Africa, the digital startups. So it's got an incredible vibe. It's also got a lot of very wealthy people who live in certain parts of the town. And then obviously you also have the poverty of the township right next door. It's a fascinating place, but yes, it is absolutely beautiful. To use such a setting and go look for the dark places is always a great thing, because you can set the one against the other. I love that in the writing process.
Yeah, the clash of darkness and light. A lot of this is about greed as a motivation. You look around anywhere in any place, and that's not too hard to find. Again, this is global storytelling. But was there a particular thing that happened to you or that you observed that struck you in regard to, this overarching thing of greed that then motivated the story? I mean, the villains in the story are motivated by greed. What motivated Deon Meyer to write about greed and its consequences?
It was a sort of an accumulative process. First of all, our former president turned out to be a very greedy man, an incredibly corrupt man. And the greed that he and his cronies showed in almost bringing the country to its knees was breathtaking and heartbreaking at the same time. And then as we were starting to recover from that, with a wonderful new president and the hope of a better future, there was this incredible corporate scandal in South Africa, the biggest corporate scandal in our history, corporate fraud, very rich businessmen and it happened in Stellenbosch. This was a company that the head office was in Stellenbosch, and it did so much damage to the town, and especially the property market in Stellenbosch. And that, to me, that was sort of the final straw. It angered me, all of this, because as a country we are fragile. Our economy is incredibly fragile, and if you have so many people doing their utmost to destroy it, then that generates a lot of anger. And I've found that if I feel so strongly about something, then that always makes the writing, I think, more interesting, and it's a big impetus in the writing process. So I went with it.
Well, I mean, I think a follow-up to that is, yes, this is what you need to be the guy who sits down and writes this over the course of a year. You need that. But is there also, part of this that you feel that even though this is a novel, in a way it's telling the truth about things, and that, I guess I'm saying, is there any kind of higher level motivation in what you're doing? In terms of sending a message or maybe just sending a question?
Right. I'm always very hesitant to go there with crime fiction. My biggest concern, my biggest motivation, my main aim is to try and tell a story that I hope readers will find enthralling. I think we all write for the reader within. And that is my hope, is to write a story that I would have loved to read as a reader. And anything else that happens is sort of by chance. I think once you start moralizing in a book, for me, I don't like going there. For me, it's much more fun to use a character like Sandra Steenberg, the estate agent, and put something like this dilemma of, she's in deep financial trouble and she gets this incredible opportunity to make a lot of money, and it's as if one is asking yourself, what would you do under those circumstances? Would you be able to hang on to your integrity when the chips are down, when you're really desperate and you get this opportunity? So the questions that I ask are really about being human, and I have my characters answer them. I've never thought in terms of, I want to convey a message, I want to make a big statement, either political or ideological or moral. But, it sort of happens in the writing process, because you have characters who are confronted with certain issues, and they have to dig into your own morality, into your own view of things, and ask yourself, what would a mere mortal do under these circumstances? So in that sense, I suppose one is asking questions, but it certainly isn't one of my main objectives when I write.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's part and parcel of the construct of writing detective novels that, your people ask questions.
Right.
And, by doing that, it's a question that the reader will come across and maybe have a take on. But yeah, I mean, your prior books, this book included, I don't mean to suggest that it's didactic or moralizing or anything like that. I think the finessing that you do in this book and your books of just kind of leaving the reader with, a view of the world and maybe some questions. I like what you just said about, like, when the chips are down, how am I going to react? What choices would I make? And I think that's the power of the crime novel, that people read these books because they have those questions about themselves. These are usually stories about people who have to make very extreme decisions with a lot at stake. And we all want to know how we would we step up or would we step back? And that's you really feel that in these stories that you write, and including The Dark Flood.
Mike, I think you just made a really critical distinction when you said, the difference between sending a message and sending a question, very key distinction there.
I absolutely, when I read and I read a book that makes me ask questions, how would I have reacted? What would I have done with this moral dilemma? That's the kind of book that I love reading. I love books that make you think a little bit about, whoa, what would I have done under the situation? So I tend to do that. And I find a lot of pleasure in the writing of that too.
I thought it was interesting that Ian Rankin, who writes the Inspector Rebus novels, I remember hearing him say something about how, through Rebus, he was able to confront and kind of work through things and issues that were bothering him. I always remember that.
And, there's also the other part of it. As I said, I was very angry at all the unbridled greed in my country. Not that it's a South African phenomenon as such. If you look at what we're doing to the planet and on so many other levels, this is a global thing. But it was also, in a sense, freeing to be able to write about it, to vent my anger in that way, and to look at the country and the situation from those points of view. Somehow I felt better after writing the book in terms of all the things that's happening in the country as well.
There's a lot of journalism in your books, including this one, and it must come from the research and so forth. You really get into the whole socioeconomic spectrum in this novel. With Benny and Vaughan, as you said earlier, like Stellenbosch, beautiful place, but it's not far from the townships and places where life is difficult. They get a basic case where they're looking for a student who comes from, a pretty poor background. But then there is part of the book that deals with a billionaire and what he's up to, and the real estate lady you mentioned who sees the opportunity for possibly a big score. Do you set up this kind of structure beforehand? Like clearly saying to yourself, I want to write about the haves and have-nots, and set up a structure for the novel and then go do it, then write it? Or does that just happen organically as you're in the process, as you're writing?
It happens absolutely organically, and I would love to know if you have the same experience. I mean, when you allow your characters to work and live and interact with LA, the real LA and not a fictional one, do you find that the landscape and the neighborhoods and the cultures feed back into what they do and how they react? Because it happens by chance. You set your characters in here and then they have to deal with the real Stellenbosch in all its facets. So I never plan it, I never structure it, but because it's set in a real place, I know that it's going to happen, and I need to do my homework to understand exactly what they will be confronted with.
Yeah. I mean, my use of the word structure was kind of a trap word. That's like, I can't really say that I ever have structured any book. You have ideas about what path you want to take, maybe what neighborhood, maybe a subject, but then you just set off and write. I really feel it takes one to know one. I have always been able to tell you spend time with cops. You mentioned the cops that have been through some difficult times in Cape Town and so forth. So you do this research and you prepare to write. But this is a semi fish out of water story in that these two guys, get posted far outside of the places that they know so well. And yet you are not a fish out of water. I just found out you live in Stellenbosch. So once again, there is this aura of authenticity in the book, of verisimilitude. The subconscious nodding of the reader's head as they're reading this because they know this stuff is true. This is how it is. Did you have to start over? I mean, I don't know when you moved to Stellenbosch, but did you start over and do research with new cadre of cops and investigators in Stellenbosch, or were you able to just carry your knowledge and your sources and so forth over to the story that is in Stellenbosch?
That's well spotted, Michael. Because Benny and Vaughan were with the elite Hawks unit, the Hawks is what they call the Directorate for Priority Crime Investigations, and they've been there for the last 4 or 5 novels, and now they are posted to a police station in a town like Stellenbosch, which works on a totally different level. And all my contacts for the last, I would say, decade has been with the Hawks, and I spent some time with them, and I had to start from scratch. But luckily, I'm not sure that you have the same caliber of chief of detectives in LA. Our Western Cape chief of detectives is also a brilliant author and a lovely man and a good friend of mine, and he organized for me to have access to the Stellenbosch police station and the detective unit that sits separately. And I was able to spend some time with them and, do my initial research. And then, as always happens, you have more and more questions. And I had several of the detectives that I could go back to with every small detail to make sure that it was right. It was an education. It's such a different environment. The guys work much longer hours. You got to respect them. And I made some really good friends, and it was a fascinating experience.
That's great. I mean, that's amazing when you have that kind of access. And I'm sure some of the people watching here go like, well, if I had that access, I could write a novel too. I mean, that's everything, but it's not. That's just window dressing on character. And these guys, Benny and Vaughan, really stand out. What do you like most about pairing Benny and Vaughan? What do you like most about writing about these two guys?
Well, it's a funny thing. I mean, I started out with Benny on his own, and then Cupido sort of insinuated himself into the novels. And there was a dynamic that started between the two because Benny is the alcoholic. I think he had a much darker view of life and humanity, especially in some of the earlier novels. And Vaughan, coming from a different culture, coming from the Cape Malay, Cape Flats culture, he speaks a different version of Afrikaans. His whole point of view, his life philosophy is much different to Benny's. He's light, he's funny, he's full of self-confidence, he's incredibly proud of having achieved what he had done, while Benny has got a bit of a chip on the shoulder. And that dynamic became incredibly useful for me because I could play the one off the other. I could use both of them. And there are different types of cops. Vaughan is a very instinctive, sort of a knee-jerk, quick reaction detective. Benny is much more slow and ponderous, and that also made for interesting dynamics in terms of how they approach. The one thing that I love most about writing them at the moment is the dialogue between the two. I sometimes, the stuff that Vaughan comes up with makes me laugh while I'm writing it. And when that happens, you know that, this should be fun to read.
Yeah, it's weird to say this about a book called The Dark Flood, but there's a lot of humor in this book, and it is in the dialogue. But sometimes their relationship reminds me of Crate and Barrel from the Bosch TV show. How much is that front of mind when you're writing that? I'm taking my readers across some dark stuff here, and you got to pop in some levity every now and then. How important is writing, having humor in what essentially is hard-boiled detective story?
It's when I read a book, and I think humor works at its very best when the moment is darkest or the suspense is at its highest. Humor is an incredible release valve to change the timbre of a scene or of a chapter. So I think it's incredibly important. But humor, I think, is also an incredibly dangerous thing to try and force onto a character or a situation or into a story. So I'm very careful. Luckily, Vaughan and his culture sort of brings forth certain views of life. He doesn't take life or himself too seriously, and it sort of happens on its own. But as I say, you have to be careful not to push it, not to try and be funny, because you'll fall flat very, very quickly.
Yeah. You write your book in Afrikaans, and then they get translated by someone else. Are you ever, maybe you have done this, are you ever attempted to write in English or maybe translate yourself?
I would never be able to translate myself. Writing a book the first time is hard enough. And when you're finished with it and you know what happens, you know exactly how the story works, to write it a second time would drive me absolute nuts. I also don't think my English is quite good enough to be able to do a decent translator. And I have such a great translator in Laura Seeger. We've been working together for many years now. Our method is that she would do 10 chapters and send them to me, and I will look at them, go through it word by word. She knows the characters. She knows the vernacular. It was very interesting for me when we started working together. Laura is a very decent woman, and the profanity of my characters was a bit much for her in the beginning. So she would tone it down in the translation all the time, and then I had to turn up the volume when I received it. But no, it's translating them myself, I would never be able to do. Writing in English, I do a lot of my screenplay writing in English. I like it. I do most of my reading in English. So it feels okay. But, writing a screenplay in English is one thing. Writing a novel in English is a different kettle of fish.
I like how not everything is translated. Like the novels, this novel have a sprinkling of Afrikaans in the dialogue when it has to be there. So all these questions I have, they all lead to this most important question. I don't even know if I'm going to say this right, but what is a Snot Snook?
A Snot Snook. Snook is probably the most delicious fish you'll ever eat. You find it in the waters around Cape Town. It's especially caught in winter. And it's not the big fisher boats that catch them. It's the small guys who have to catch them with a hand line. It's very hard work. And these small fishermen, they load them onto pickup trucks and they come to the cities and they sell them. And if they can't sell them quick enough, then some of these snook go bad and they become soft and flimsy and inedible. And you call that a snot snook because it is snotty and not nice anymore.
Wow. I had a totally different picture of what was meant when someone said they were going to hit somebody with a snot snook.
What was your picture?
I thought it was like a handkerchief that had snot in it or something. I don't know. You better take that up with Laura. Maybe that should have been translated. But, so you mentioned writing scripts in English. Also, why don't you tell us? We kind of got a heads up on this right before we started that you got a couple of projects that are moving very quickly towards filming. Can you tell us? Can you talk publicly about this stuff?
I've been alluding to it. Unfortunately, both the broadcasters involved have not made the announcement officially. They want to do it with a bit of a big announcement. So what I can say is that one of my books has been turned into a movie. I was involved in the script development myself, and I would love to talk to you about how much you're involved in the Bosch and the Lincoln Lawyer scripts. But then also there's a series coming that I think most people who read my books have been waiting for. And I'm just burning to tell everybody about it. They are about to go into pre-production. It's a UK, South African co-production, and I'm very excited about it. And then there are also two other series on the back burner, but those are the two ones that are about to go into pre-production. And we hope to make official announcement, I think, within the next month.
Okay, I'm sorry I brought that up. I didn't realize.
No, you're welcome.
It was
but please, I'm very curious to know about your involvement with the scripts of both the Bosch series and now the Lincoln Lawyer series.
Yeah, I mean, I would say it sounds like what you're doing. If they will have you, then take that opportunity, because you know these characters and these stories better than anybody. So it's refreshing that I think mostly with streamers that they're interested in having the originators of these stories and characters be involved. I think it used to be that they just pat you on the head and say, go back and write your next novel or whatever it is you do, and we'll take it from here. There's less and less of that happening, and I think it results in better stuff being made. So when I was asked to be involved in Bosch or Lincoln Lawyer, I said, of course, I'll be involved. It takes more hours out of your day, and
yeah,
you got to keep. I've always kept in mind, I'm sure you are, that I'm a book writer first, and
yes.
That's the priority, and that will always be that way. But it's fun to be involved in this stuff.
It is indeed. I remember you and I can't remember if it was at BoucherCon in Toronto, where we were talking about this exact same subject, and you gave me some great advice about selling movie rights, and you said, take the money and walk away. And it was great advice until the streamers came along, and now we have the opportunity to be involved, and it is very refreshing and a real privilege.
Yeah, I mean, the streaming world has opened up character, I think, and the movie business has all kind of gone towards these gigantic films that, have to make $300 million or they're not interested. And so it's been fun for me, and telling serialized storytelling, not trying to cram everything I know about Harry Bosch into 90 minutes.
Exactly.
And that's the best part about it. I got one last question for you. Very esoteric, because it's something I've been thinking about, because I hit 65 in this past year. I think this is, how many books have you written? Is this the 14th?
This is the 16th. There was one in Afrikaans that was never translated. So I think it was, I think I'm writing the 16th at the moment. So that was probably the 15th. You're right.
Okay. And so for many years, you sustained yourself as a novelist, and I know you didn't start out that way. It doesn't start out that way for most of us. I was a newspaper reporter, and I got mad with somebody because I didn't get a promotion or something, and I thought I'd write a book and make some extra money, maybe buy a house or whatever. And now here I am all these years later. What do you do when you sit back and look at your path? Is it a constant surprise for you, or did you know all along that you would end up where you are?
it's a constant amazement to me. You know, I grew up in a small gold mining town up on the Highveld, where being an author was never part of one's dreams. You just didn't even dare to dream that. So it was never an option for me. You know, I had to get a job, a 9-to-5 job, and make some money. I come from a blue collar house in a blue collar neighborhood. So for me, that was unthinkable. And that had happened, and it happened in the way that it did. It continues to amaze me. It's sort of a magical thing that I sometimes want to pinch myself and say, is this really true? I mean, you've had the experience where you walk into a bookshop in France or in Germany and you see your books there and you think, wow, this is like a dream. It's a little bit unreal. So for me, it's constant amazement. Even now with the TV series and the movies, I mean, me, a guy from Klerksdorp, having written a movie, it's just unthinkable.
Yeah, I agree with you. Same experience for me. And that was, wow, that's a cool coincidence. I didn't know you grew up in a gold mining town. And I started this by saying you and I are digging for gold in the same mine. That's pretty cool. Well, anyway, I don't know if any questions came in, or Patrick, you have anything more to add to this discussion?
Well, I wanted to ask you, Deon, a little bit about this character in the book who has a great name, Jasper Boonstra. He's a character that seems very, I'm trying to be diplomatic, very familiar to us. Can you talk a little bit about him?
Yeah, you know, he was based on several rather newsworthy people in the 2 years that I was busy developing and writing the book. There was obviously the movie mogul in America, in LA, who became the most hated figure of the Me Too movement. He and what he did had a very big influence on the Jasper Boonstra character. There was also the corporate fraudster in South Africa that I think that influenced him to a certain extent. But I mean, I could choose between so many interesting bad people in South Africa, but he's sort of an amalgamation. I took the worst evils from several people and I put them together. For me, everything stands in service of the story, and if the story determines certain characteristics from the bad guy, then I'm happy to go there and to find them wherever I can.
Right. Now, I know that there's a vibrant crime fiction scene in South Africa, and probably a lot of authors who haven't made their way over here. Are there any fellow Afrikaners that are writing that you'd like to kind of bring up that we might not know about?
Yes, you know, one of the great things for me about South African literature in general is that in 1994, at the end of apartheid, our house of literature was almost bare. There were just 1 or 2 rooms filled with some bad stuff. And now it is full. Every room is full. We have, in every genre, we have really great books from all language groups in South Africa, all culture groups in South Africa. And that to me is just incredible. So in crime fiction, we have great Zulu writers. We have 1 or 2 Tswana authors. We have a lot of English crime fiction being written in South Africa, and then obviously in Afrikaans as well. The Afrikaans crime fiction has proliferated in the last 15 years. It has become, like, I think the genre is just about everywhere in the world the most popular genre in Afrikaans, and there's our young people coming through who I think have great international potential. Some of the older people, I think someone like Karen Breinart, a good friend of mine, she's been translated into several languages, incredible writer. And I hope to see more. I think Irma Venter's books have just started to be translated now. So there's been a trickle of Afrikaans books getting into the international market, and I think it should become a flood in the next decade or so.
Who is you mentioned that the West Cape police commander was an accomplished writer. Is he a novelist?
No, he wrote two volumes of autobiography, but they are incredibly good. He wrote them in the Cape Flats vernacular, the form of Afrikaans spoken by the Cape Malay people, which to me is the most musical and most beautiful version of the language. And he's a man by the name of Jeremy Vieri, and he's an incredible man. You know, his story, the story that he tells of his life, of being a young teacher working in the Cape Flats during apartheid, becoming part of the ANC, part of the MK, the military structure of the ANC. He went to Robben Island. He was in prison. He became one of Nelson Mandela's bodyguards after the end of apartheid. And then he started working in the police, and he became a police general and the head of detectives in the Western Cape. He's an exceptional man, and I think he's one of the best writers in Afrikaans at the moment. He keeps promising me that his next book is going to be fiction, but it's not going to be crime fiction, which I'm very grateful for, because I think he'll be heavy competition.
Yeah.
I have a good question that's come in for both of you guys, and it is, let's see here. We have a reader or a viewer in Italy, Stefania. And her question is, for both authors, have you ever been inspired by true crime stories, current or past? And this is the key here. Have you ever been afraid or hesitant to write about something? Are there any topics that you won't touch? So true crime stories, and then what won't you write about?
Michael, you want to go first?
Well, I'll just say very quickly, because as a journalist, true crime stories have inspired maybe all my books. I mean, there's something true at the seed level of almost all my books, something I've heard or a story a detective's told me. Usually small stuff, not stuff that, would be heard of or in Italy or anything, possibly not even LA, just kind of, if you have the access to detectives and their lives and the stories they tell, that's the starting point for me. And, I'm on that, like most writers think that you can write about anything you want to, but that's the question. Do you want to? Do you want to spend a year with something? I always go back to a book I wrote many years ago called The Poet, which was about a child killer. And, none of that happened on the page, but it was still, not a great year, the year I was working on that. And I had some readers who said, I like your books, I like your other books, but I can't read this about a child killer. And I didn't have a child. I wasn't a father at that time. And later when I became a father, I reread the book and I totally saw their point. So yes, I mean, you should be able to write whatever you want, but then you have to make the decision of how long you want to dwell on a subject.
I absolutely agree with that last part. I also, certain things I just find difficult to write about because I find it extremely upsetting. So I simply don't go there. There are so many other options about things that one can write about that it's not necessary to go there. A book it's a marathon, and as Michael says, to be busy with that kind of thing for so long, it just can't be fun. I've also been, I would say, true crime has ignited a lot of my story ideas. Obviously, you can't use it exactly. Hi, Barbara. It's so good to see you.
Probably interrupted. You're saying something profound, Sir Kieran.
No problem. No, I love looking at real crime and asking myself, what if? Because the whole game of what if is where I think all stories come from. So yes, I look at true crime. The Dark Flood, as a matter of fact, we've spoken about Jeremy Vieri. He told me about a very interesting case that he and his team of detectives have solved, and that ignited an idea that became part of the Dark Flood, but it's not the story that he told me. It's not the real case.
I popped in to tell Michael that we have actually binged on The Lincoln Lawyer. I can't even remember the last time I sat down and watched 4 episodes in one evening. It's amazing.
Thanks.
Really love the new guy. He gets more Spanish when he gets into, his accent grows when he gets under stress, but he's just wonderful.
Yeah, they did a really good job with it. I'm real happy with it.
You should be. So my only quick question was, Deon, when are we going to see you again? I mean, I came to Cape Town and couldn't find you, but can you come back to Scottsdale?
Barbara, I would love to. My wife and I are going over to New York in December to visit one of our kids who's au pairing in Connecticut. I'm not sure there's going to be time to pop into Scottsdale, but I would love to come back. You know, my experience there was an unforgettable one. I would love to take my wife. She's never been to America. I would love to take her to Scottsdale. And we started playing golf, Marianne and I, a couple of months ago, very badly. But I see that there are great golf courses in your part of the country. So we might come for that too.
That'd be wonderful. Well, you can't really pop in from New York, but nonetheless, December is a great time. Right. Michael, we're going to see you in November, I hope.
Yeah, I got my book's been turned in, so.
Oh, that's exciting. Well, I'm going to depart because I'm actually on my way out the door with puppy care, being a new parent. But I just wanted to say hi to both of you. Hi, Patrick. Nice to see you. I'll see you at 5 with Chris Holm and James Rollins, right?
Sounds good.
Great. Bye,
Barbara,
guys.
thank you very much for hosting this, Barbara. I appreciate it very much.
Oh,
thank
no,
you.
it's not me. It's Patrick. But I'm glad you guys got together because I know Mike is such a big fan of your work, and so are Patrick and I, Deon. It's lovely to see you. Bye.
Good to see you too. Bye-bye, Barbara.
So, Mike, just quickly, The Desert Star. I was very encouraged when I saw that title. But it's not Arizona, is it? It's California desert?
Yeah, it's Mojave, Death Valley. Cool. I'm sure they have the Desert Star flower in Arizona.
What can you tell us anything about it? Just a little glimpse.
Well, I mean, it's funny. Deon was talking about asking questions in books as opposed to making statements. You know, my very last book ends with a question about where does Ballard go from there? She's given a choice basically, and then I just ended the book. So I let readers think about that for a year. So that question, like where she goes next, is answered in this book, and she once again works with Harry Bosch and kind of works on his white whale case, a case he never solved when he was carrying a badge, and they go, and it's a little bit of a travel book. They follow this case to Chicago and then to Key West. And so that was all kind of fish out of water for me. Maybe I should have sent him to Stellenbosch, where with his last name, the drinks would be on other people, I'm sure. But yeah, it was fun to write. I went to these places to do a little bit of research and then write stories.
And Deon, I know this book is just out, but I'm sure you're hard at work, or maybe have even finished a new book. What's next for you?
I'm very far from being finished, but I'm working very hard on a new book. And again, something a little bit different. It's a Benny and Vaughan novel, but there's some other elements that I haven't tried before.
Oh, cool. Let me see if there's anything else that has come in here. Okay. Yeah. Quick question about the pandemic. I know it's not something we're also tired of the damn thing. You know, Mike was the first writer that I can think of that actually kind of addressed it a little bit in fiction, in crime fiction. How has it been, Deon, in South Africa? And, you know, how are you dealing with it in your work, or are you?
Let me just say that the first 2 lockdowns in South Africa, when COVID came for the first time, was pretty tough for most people in South Africa. The lockdown was incredibly harsh. But I think as a country, and especially in terms of the number of people who got seriously ill, I think our numbers are a bit better than most of the rest of the world. For me personally, it was actually a godsend, because I had such a full year, and then suddenly the calendar opened up and I could finish The Dark Flood, which was really great for me. I've made the conscious decision in the book that I've started now not to include COVID in any way. I'm so sick of it. I'm so sick of wearing a mask. I duly wear it when I have to. But you know, it's been such a frustration, and I'm not sure I want to go there. So I'm hoping, I'm writing it as a post-COVID novel with almost no reference to it, hoping that it won't come back and become a huge deal in South Africa again. So I'm taking a little bit of a gamble.
How
Yeah, I
about
do
you,
the
Mike?
same thing.
Same thing.
And
Yeah.
Desert Stars, to me, it's a post-COVID novel. Let's hope it stays post-COVID.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's funny. The Dark Flood, the title could be a Connelly title, couldn't it? It does. Yeah. Well, gentlemen, this has really been a great hour. Thanks so much for spending it with us, and for everybody watching. Of course, here are the latest books: The Dark Flood, just out by Deon Meyer, and here's Mike's most recent book, The Dark Hours, Desert Star, coming in November. Gentlemen, any parting thoughts? Or
I just want to have Deon agree that we should make a reunion tour and at some point show up at Poison Pen in person next time.
I'll be there, Michael. Give me a date and a time, and I'll definitely be there. Thank you so much, Michael, for doing this. I really appreciate it. It was great seeing you again. It's great to hear that the family's all doing well. And Patrick and Poison Pen, thank you so much. If it's tough not to be there in person, but to be able to do it with you guys in this way, it's a privilege. Thank you so much.
it's a treat and an honor to see you again, and you too, Mike, as always. All right, gentlemen. Well, thanks so much, and we will be seeing you soon. And thanks everybody for tuning in.